John of Montfort, sometimes known as John IV, Duke of Brittany, and 6th Earl of Richmond from 1341 to his death. He was the son of Arthur II, Duke of Brittany, and his second wife, Yolande de Dreux. He contested the inheritance of the Duchy of Brittany by his niece, Joan of Penthièvre, which led to the War of the Breton Succession, which in turn evolved into being part of the 100 Years' War between England and France. John's patron in his quest was King Edward III of England. He died in 1345, 19 years before the end of the war, and the victory of his son John IV over Joan of Penthièvre and her husband, Charles of Blois. Biography. John of Montfort was born in 1295, the only son to Arthur II of Brittany and his second wife Yolande of Dreux. In 1322 he inherited from his mother the title of Count of Montfort-la-Marie, and in 1329 he married Joanna of Flanders in Chartres. Joanna was the daughter of Louis I, Count of Nevers, and Joan, Countess of Rethel. They had 2 children. John IV, Duke of Brittany, married Mary of England, daughter of King Edward III of England, in 1361 in Oxfordshire, Joan Holland of Kent in 1366 in London, Infanta Juana de Navarre, daughter of King Carlos II of Navarre, in 1386 in Saillé-Prades-Guérande. Joan of Brittany, Baroness of Drayton, married before the 21st of October 1385 to Ralph Bassett, 3rd Lord Bassett of Drayton. Succession to Duke John III. On the 30th of April 1341, John III, Duke of Brittany, died without a male heir. His half-brother, John of Montfort, was a candidate for the succession, which was also claimed by Joan of Penthièvre, niece of John III and wife of Charles of Blois, himself a nephew of the Philip VI, King of France. The king was, of course, favourable to his nephew. The Duchy of Brittany historically had a semi-salic mode of inheritance. Male primogeniture was followed unless no direct male descendants remained. At that point the closest female descendant inherited as duchess, with her husband serving as duke by right of representation. The position of John of Montfort was legally founded on the belief that a brother was a closer heir than a beneficiary niece, and that the salic form of inheritance adopted by the Kingdom of France should be followed. This argument was based on the fact that since 1297 Brittany had been a duché pairie, and that the legislation of the suzerain kingdom should therefore be applied. Challenges to the Salic law of the Franks had historically been rejected for the Kingdom of France, allowing Philip V to gain the throne in 1316, and Philip VI most recently. This made Edward III's support of John of Montfort quite ironic, in that the argument for Edward III to inherit the Kingdom of France was based on the opposing philosophy that the crown should be able to descend through a female line. A civil war, termed the War of the Breton Succession, then began and lasted 23 years. This conflict was also called La Guerre de Jeanne, after the French names of the 2 duchesses in competition, Jeanne de Penthièvre and Jeanne de Flanders, wife of John of Montfort. Early stages of the war. After the funeral of John III, Charles of Blois returned to the court of France and John of Montfort returned to his Breton estate in Guérande. Then, incited by his wife, he went with a small army to Nantes where he was well received by the inhabitants who swore their loyalty. John then went to Limoges where he managed to obtain the ducal treasury. John returned to Nantes and was recognized as duke in May 1341 by an assembly composed of members of the towns and minor nobles, but shunned by the major vassals with the exception of Hervé VII, Count of Élie-Couteau. Thanks to the ducal treasury, he recruited mercenaries which allowed him to perform in June and July Great Ride in Brittany, and take control of the duchy. John first gained Rennes, then Vannes and the places surrounding the Château de Cessigno, Auray, Hennebont, and then Quimperlé. Having failed to take the domains of Rouen, he submitted Quimper and Brest before descending to Carhaix, and then went back northward and captured Saint-Brieuc, Limbala, Jugon, Dinan, Dol de Bretagne, and returned to Nantes via Ploermel. Always accompanied by Hervé VII of L'Équeton, John obtained the submission, if not the support, of some of the major nobles who possessed several of these strongholds and had been loyal to Charles of Blois. However, it would probably require getting Jocelyn, or the support of the high secular clergy and great lords, or more, to control the domains of the Penthievres and the House of Rouen, which represented about two-thirds of Brittany. John also went to England and met with Edward III of England in Windsor, who promised him military assistance and invested him with the honour of Richmond. Charles of Blois then made an appeal to Philip VI, who summoned John of Montfort to a Court of Peers session in Conflans in September 1341. In this context, by the judgment of Conflans, the Duchy of Brittany was attributed to Charles of Blois. Philip VI agreed to receive Limage Lige of Charles of Blois on behalf of his wife, and confiscated from John of Montfort the French lands of the county of Montfort-la-Marie, as well as the Viscounty of Limoges that he held more unduly. In October 1341, Charles of Blois and John II, Duke of Normandy, put together an army and penetrated into Brittany. They managed to retrieve a number of strongholds which had been lost, including Nantes, which relented on the 21st of November 1341 after 3 weeks of siege. John of Montfort was captured and imprisoned in the Louvre in Paris. Despite the change of camp of Hervé VII de Leon, Joanna, the wife of John of Montfort, continued the armed struggle supported by his allies. Subsequent stages of the war. After a winter break that ended on 15 April 1342, Charles of Blois resumed the fight and regained a large part of Brittany between May and September 1342. King Edward III of England decided to intervene on behalf of the House of Montfort. Charles de Blois failed to take Hennebont, which was defended by Joanna of Flanders, while Robert III of Artois was mortally wounded besieging Vannes in vain leading an English contingent. In January 1343, through Pope Clement VI, a truce was signed at Malestroit to bring peace and the liberation of John of Montfort. The latter was released in September 1343 and retired to England the 27th of March 1345. His return to the struggle with reinforcements provided by King Edward III of England put an end to the truce. John of Montfort unsuccessfully laid siege to Quimper, then fell ill and died in Hennebont on 26 September 1345. Tomb of John of Montfort. He was buried in the convent of the Dominicans of Quimperlé, where his tomb, which had already been desecrated, was found again in December 1883. His remains are now in the Church of Saint Croix de Quimperlé. Ancestry.